And David Comont is going to talk to us about monitoring and managing herbicide resistance in blackgrass in the UK. Over to David.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. Can you go to the first slide, please, Laura? Yeah, and thanks to Steve as well for giving an introduction to the evolution of resistance there in insects. Well, I work in Rothamsted's weeds group, and I'm going to give a brief overview of the types of research that we do in the area of monitoring and managing herbicide resistance in blackgrass in the UK. Next slide, please.
Ooh,
there we go. Just some pretty pictures. So for those that might not have seen it, blackgrass is an autumn germinating grass weed that's become a particular problem in winter cereal crops in the UK, but also more widely across Europe. And part of the reason that it's becoming such a problem is because it's adapted to do really well in winter cropping situations, but also because it's now evolved widespread resistance to a whole range of different herbicides. So in practice, that's resulted in some pretty severe in-field blackgrass infestations. You can see that in the pictures here. These are wheat crops which have been infested with blackgrass, and all of the seed heads that you can see sticking up there are the weed, the blackgrass, sticking up above the crop. Next slide, please. So in this talk, I'm just going to highlight 3 different approaches that we're using in our research and how we hope that might help to tackle blackgrass problems in the field. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about surveillance, and in particular our annual mapping of blackgrass abundance. I'll give some examples of resistance testing that we carry out at Rothamsted, and I'll mention some of the novel technological approaches that we're using to help to develop and expand our blackgrass research. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay, in terms of surveillance then, we've established a network of about 200 fields across England that we try to survey for blackgrass abundance every year, and the locations are shown on the map on the left of the screen there. And the way that we do this surveillance is that we divide each field up into grids, and then each summer we walk up and down the tram lines and score the blackgrass into categories from absent to very high, just based on a quick visual estimate of how much blackgrass is there. Now, while that doesn't tell you the exact numbers of plants, it does give you a pretty good idea of how bad the field is and where the patches of blackgrass are. So you can see from the field map on the screen there that this particular field's got a real problem towards the lower left, but has less blackgrass at the top of the field. And so we can use that in our research, and we also send those maps back to the growers after each survey so they can make use of that information as well. Next slide, please. Now, as well as doing that, for as many of these fields as possible, we also try and collect the agronomic or management data over the course of a rotation in that field. And that includes a whole range of different things like herbicide and fertilizer use, the crop type and the sort of cultivation that's being employed, the type of soil there, and the dates of harvest and other sort of intervention dates. So for each field then, we've started to build up a really neat database detailing exactly what's happened in each field. Next slide, please. Yeah, so really the upshot of all of this is that we're starting to be able to link the changes in blackgrass abundance over time with the types of management being employed in those fields at a large scale across the country. So as you can see in the pictures here, by surveying the same fields over time, we can find examples where the blackgrass population has been effectively controlled. And in this case, you can see this particular field had a particularly severe blackgrass problem back in 2014. You can see the top left picture. But over the subsequent years that we've monitored it, the blackgrass population has gone right down. So by collecting the agronomic data from fields like this one, we can get a clearer picture of what's actually working to control blackgrass in different situations across the country. And so the overall aim then is that this is going to allow us to more accurately predict which interventions are likely to work most effectively in which different field situation. Next slide, please. So that was the surveillance side of things. But another component of the work that we do is to screen these populations for herbicide resistance to get an idea of the extent and distribution of different resistance mechanisms across the country. Now, we've collected seeds from each of those field populations, and over the past few years, we've been working away in the glasshouse to screen them for resistance to a range of post-stem herbicides, so things in the ALS and the ACCase groups. as well as the things like the pre-em flufenicet and also the broad spectrum herbicide glyphosate or Roundup. And by doing that, we can get a really nice picture of the extent of resistance out there and how it's distributed across the country. And we did find a lot of resistance in the blackgrass populations that we'd sampled. Next slide, please. Yeah, but here I'm going to focus on the glyphosate in particular as an example of why we do this kind of resistance screening. And the two maps here show the location of our set of blackgrass populations, which have been screened for sensitivity to glyphosate. And they've been screened at a field rate dose on the left-hand map and at a lower dose on the map towards the center of the screen. And each point there is colored to represent the number of plants which survived spraying at those different doses, from red, where lots of plants survived, to blue, where everything was killed. So you can see the positive outcome here is that more or less everything died at the higher field rate dose, which suggests to us that we're not seeing glyphosate resistance in any of our blackgrass populations. But the interesting research outcome for us is that different populations show very different sensitivity to glyphosate at the lower doses that we looked at. So in some populations, this lower dose can kill almost everything, whereas other populations we saw maybe up to about 80% of plants surviving these lower dose rates. So that suggests that not every blackgrass population is responding in the same way. Next slide, please. So the reason that that's interesting comes up when we link this information with glyphosate usage data. So from statistical analysis, we've found that it's fields where glyphosate has been used more intensively, which now have greater number of plants surviving these lower glyphosate doses. And when we look at national data, things like FERRA's data, which is what's shown on the graph here, we can see that glyphosate usage in the UK has steadily been increasing. The figure on the graph there shows data from the early 90s up to about 2016 or 17. And you can see that glyphosate use has pretty steadily increased across a range of crop types. So putting the two together then, it's suggesting that rising glyphosate use in the field might be acting to select for blackgrass plants with lowered sensitivity to that herbicide. And so then that raises the question of whether that's going to open the door to glyphosate resistance in the future. So that's really our aim with this type of work. It's both to show what resistance is out there, but it's also to highlight what future resistances we might face in the coming years. Next slide, please. So the third area that we're working on really is how we can embrace new technologies to help us with blackgrass detection and our blackgrass research. One specific example is the use of new imaging systems to try and help us to distinguish blackgrass from other crops and weeds in the field. We're in the process of working with an external company to test UAV mounted camera systems to detect blackgrass. The images on the left here show an example of how we're starting to take that UAV imagery and try and match it with the in-field blackgrass maps that we create each summer. We're also working with other more sensitive multispectral systems to try to develop algorithms which more easily identify blackgrass from wheat. So the images in the center of the slide here show this in practice, where we're using just the multispectral properties alone to try and classify leaves as either the crop or the weed. And we're trying to do that at a very early developmental stage. So the goal here is to try and develop quicker ways to survey blackgrass in the field and potentially to try and do it at different or earlier times of year as well. Next slide, please. So finally then, to bring this all together, we're starting to work also with bigger companies like IBM, which is giving us access to a much wider range of environmental data sets and things like soil types, climate data, weather and weather forecasts. And these are the things which might influence blackgrass populations too. So we're using their artificial intelligence and computing power to try to help identify how these different environmental data sets cause changes in blackgrass populations, as well as to help us with the development of those new approaches for blackgrass detection that I previously mentioned. So overall, we're working towards a goal here to try and more effectively link together these different types of data that we can collect on blackgrass. The research is working on blackgrass evolution and ecology, and the farmers in our field network. We're linking those together to try and allow us to do these types of research more effectively and at a larger scale. Next slide, please. So overall then, our surveillance is useful in helping to demonstrate agronomic strategies which are actually working out in the field to control blackgrass. And our resistance screening has been really useful in helping to identify future resistance threats that we might face. So lastly, we're now embracing these kind of technological solutions, which we hope will allow us to do this type of research more rapidly and over a greater area. And at that point, next slide, please. That's it. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, David. Thanks for a very nice talk. I'm just looking in the question. We don't seem to have any questions for you, which surprises me, given that there's an awful lot of worries about blackgrass out there, I know, from everyone you talk to. So there aren't any. Does anyone want to type a quick question in the Q&A? You're likely to get it chosen because there aren't actually any in there at the moment. Okay, no. Well, I'm sure, you know, after the meeting, I think most of our speakers would welcome any questions that people want to send in. Perhaps I shouldn't say that, but
absolutely.
I'm sure people, well, we're always happy to discuss our work with people. Oh, hang on, I think we do have a question. What number's gone up? Okay, so Luke is asking, how do you think this will help farmers to tackle blackgrass? That's a very pertinent question, David.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as I tried to send with the resistance testing, often a lot of the problems that we've had in the past is that we identify resistance once it's already become a problem out in the field. And so it takes us a long time to screen them, and we only start screening once blackgrass problem has become apparent. What we're trying to do now is move towards a more preemptive approach to take the herbicides which actually are still working and look at those before we see resistance in the field to try and get a feel for where we might start to see problems, so that we can try and bring in management solutions which will help to limit the evolutionary pressure on that resistance mechanism and limit the spread if it does start to arise. So that's one aspect. The second is that if we can start to detect blackgrass earlier in the field, so we can see where blackgrass patches are going to be particularly problematic and we can tackle those straight away, and hopefully it will help, because growers won't necessarily spend a lot of time on cultivating those areas using fertilizers, other fungicides, pesticides, only to then realize that the blackgrass densities are so high that they have to sacrifice that bit of crop right at the end of the season by spraying off. So we're hoping if we can be a bit more proactive at earlier time points, then maybe we can help to limit the costs going into that.
Oh, we must be on a roll. We've got a couple of more questions now. Bill Langford's asking, the imaging of blackgrass looks great. How early in the growth stage can you identify it?
It's an interesting question. We found that actually we can identify using multispectral properties and a kind of artificial intelligence approach. We can identify blackgrass leaves from wheat leaves at a very early stage. And in fact, it's almost easier at the earlier time points. So maybe when blackgrass has got to about the 2 or 3 leaf stage. What we've done at the moment, though, is that's been based in the laboratory. We haven't been able to roll that out into the field yet. So we'd like to do some further testing to see whether all blackgrass populations have the same kind of discriminatory multispectral peaks, or whether we can identify ways to take that out into the field to do it rather than just in a laboratory setting. So there's more research ongoing for that.
Okay, so one more quick question, which is a very interesting one from Ron Granger. Any other grass species we should be concerned about?
I mean, blackgrass has become the #1, and so that's the one that we focused on, but we are aware that other species can be a particular problem. Lolium, so ryegrass, seems to be an issue in certain areas, and where that is becoming an issue, it can be quite severe, like severe infestations. Bromes also seem to be evolving resistance to various different actives, and I know that people at ADAS have been working quite a lot to look to see whether bromes could become a particular problem in the future. So yeah, there are other grassweed species which we should be keeping an eye on too.
So watch this space.